You may be seated. So Herman and Henrietta were buying a new house. Henrietta had just inherited a large sum of money from her father. And she liked to remind Herman of that. So they bought this house, and they were going in on the day that they purchased it, and they were kind of touring all the rooms. And Henrietta says, Herman, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my money. Herman said nothing. So as the day went on, they had the furniture delivery guys come, and they were delivering brand new furniture. Everything new for their house. Yeah, she went big. And as they were delivering all this beautiful furniture, they were looking it all over, and Henrietta couldn't resist, and so she said once again, Herman, we wouldn't have all this beautiful furniture if it wasn't for my money. Again, Herman remained silent. And towards the end of the day, they decided to go for a little drive around their neighborhood, and they just purchased a new car. They purchased a Jaguar, and so they got into the car, and Henrietta, again, once more, could not resist. And she said, Herman, we wouldn't be here in this luxurious car if it wasn't for my money. And Herman said, finally, he said, Henrietta, I don't want to make you feel bad, but if it wasn't for your money, I wouldn't be here. Yeah. Does money make people look better? I don't know. So let's talk about money again. We're spending 2 weeks on money. One was last week, and this is the final week we're going to talk about money this summer. Would you turn in your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 27? Proverbs 27. The Proverbs have a lot to say about money. I mean, the Bible has a lot to say about money. But Proverbs 27 has an interesting passage. There's 4 or 5 verses that speak about how to handle money and how to view money. And I think it would serve us well to look at this morning. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 23 and following. Verse 23. Know well the condition of your flocks and give attention to your herds. For riches do not last forever, and does a crown endure to all generations? When the grass is gone and the new growth appears, and the vegetation of the mountains is gathered, the lambs will provide for your clothing, and the goats the price of a field. There will be enough goat's milk for your food, for the food of your household, and the maintenance of your girls. So the author of these Proverbs is giving us an image that maybe is different than what you normally think of when you think of managing wealth. When you think of managing wealth, you usually don't think of herds and sheep and cattle and goats. When you think of managing herds, maybe you think of a large family with lots of kids. But, this is different because these herds are wealth. And if you ever pay attention to the Old Testament, sometimes it talks about like Abraham or Isaac or Jacob, and it will like list how many herds that they had, and how many animals they've got. Or when Jacob was sending that present to Esau to try to pacify him, it like lists it very exactly. And the reason it does that is you can see how wealthy of a gift that it was, how rich the gift was. That's the reason all that stuff is listed. Oh, this is an expensive kind of gift. So herds equal money, equal wealth. And so when the writer says, you need to, verse 23, know well the condition of your flocks, give attention to your herds, he's saying you need to know your wealth. You need to know your numbers. You need to manage your business well, manage your herd well. Let's say it like this. We'll get this on here. We should diligently steward the resources that God has provided. We should diligently steward the resources God has provided. Now, here's the thing about herds, and we'll come back to the point. If you're jotting that down, I'll come back to it. This is the thing you got to know about herds. More than the fact that they stand for wealth, you should know Psalm 50, where the Lord says, for every beast of the forest is mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that move in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. God is saying all of your wealth, all of your cattle, all of your herds, all that stuff that you possess, it all belongs to me. Whether you own it or your neighbor owns it or the pagan in another country, whether he owns it, it's still all mine. And so in some sense you could make the argument, wealth, when we talk about money, some people think, well, like money is evil, right? But no, it's the love of money that's the root of all kinds of evil. Money, some people say, is amoral. It's not immoral, it's not moral, it's kind of like it's neutral. You could even make an argument, though, that wealth and resources are good things that God has provided. Maybe they're even better than neutral, right? If God owns all the cattle and He provides it to you so that you have resources that can help you live, I know that's not paper money, but at the same time, these are all God's resources. It's a good thing. I think you could make an argument that wealth can be a good thing that God has provided. Yes, it comes with temptations. We looked at some of that last week. But we should diligently then steward the resources that God has provided. And maybe this is the most important place to start when you talk about money, and maybe one of the most important principles. I remember hearing growing up that you should do the 80-10-10 principle with your money. You save 10%, you give to the Lord's work 10%, that's a tithe, and then you live on the 80. I kind of grew up with that whole notion, right? But even though I think that's good wisdom and good advice, the percentage that's even more important than that one is 100%. Because 100% of what you have belongs to the Lord. And if you can make that mental shift and say, this isn't mine, it's God's, and that just makes me a steward of it, that wisdom will serve you well. That truth will serve you well as you look at all that you have. Now, the text says, know well the condition of your flocks. Give attention to your herds. So I got to know, how are the flocks doing? What's going on with the herds? Pay attention to it. I mean, this is basically an invitation that says, would you use good and sound and wise and ethical business principles and money principles in handling the resources and the wealth that you have? Wisely use it because God has entrusted it to you. You can't bury it, right? And you don't want to waste it. Speaking of waste, here's another verse from Proverbs to consider with this whole thing. Proverbs 28:19, just a chapter away. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread. But he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. I love the juxtaposition of those two things. Plenty of bread, plenty of poverty. Work your field. So he's saying you ought to pay attention to your wealth and your resources and what you're doing with those instead of looking over here at other things that are actually worthless pursuits. What's a worthless pursuit? Well, maybe it could be keeping up with what the neighbors have or what the person across the aisle in church has and how they're doing. Funny, we all get a little bit curious when we think about how other people manage their money and what they're spending it on, and we see it. It's not lost on me that my neighbors bought a new boat. It's a big, beautiful boat, and I drive by it every single day. And I've taken to saying when I'm driving by it, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's boat, thy neighbor's, whatever else, right? I mean, that's it, because I'm not managing their money, I'm managing mine, and I'm looking to my resources and trying to spend them wisely because God has entrusted it to me. We looked at this last week, right? He gives poverty and He gives wealth, and so if you have one or the other, you better use it well. Worthless pursuits bring you poverty. And so another way you could look at this passage is to say, you ought to know your numbers, right? Know the condition of your flocks. All those numbers in the Old Testament, how many sheep does that guy have? How many goats? How big was Jacob's gift to Esau? And the numerical values are right there in the text. Know your numbers. So I know for a lot of us, we have a budget. But if you don't, here's your encouragement to know your numbers, know your flocks. That's not how many kids you have. It's your budget. Where is your money going? How much is coming in? And if you know these things, you can manage it well. It's no surprise to me that Christian financial experts seem like they're more popular today than I ever remember them being, right? Because I think more and more the church is understanding, I need to steward what God has entrusted to me. Got to have a budget, right? Got to have some savings. Got to think wisely about how I use this. And this is the passage where you see that very, very clearly. Good financial principles are not just a thing of the world. They're a thing for all of us. Now, he gives a reason for it. If you look at the next verse, here's verse 24. 4 is how it starts. Here's the reason you ought to pay attention to your business, to your wealth. Here's the reason. 4. For riches do not last forever. And does a crown endure to all generations? So 2 things he lists as the basis for why you should be very careful how you manage your money and how you spend your money. You should be diligent, you should be shrewd. And I think the other thing he's saying there, by the way, is normally if you're diligent and shrewd and wise and smart in how you spend your money, usually you can make more, right? I mean, that's common. But there's a 4 here, right? And it's kind of a word of like a warning. Riches don't last forever. So if you're not paying attention, it can be gone quickly. Here's the way he says it elsewhere. I'm going to go back to number 2, and I'll give you that point. Do not toil to acquire wealth. I mean, toil would be that heavy, burdensome labor, workaholic sort of thing. Be discerning enough to desist. At some point, you got to call it a day. And do you know when to desist and not become the workaholic? When your eyes light on it, it's gone. For suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle towards heaven. Some of you know that all too well, right? It's just, I had it, and now I don't. It just seemed to disappear. It's gone. Here's the point, though, I think we're getting at, and this is so important for us, I think especially in the day and age we live in, and when we look at our economy, when we look at the joblessness, and maybe there's people listening right now that need to hear this. Here it is. Wealth is not the ultimate foundation for security. It's not. I mean, yes, you should have a savings, right? Church has a savings, but it's not the foundation of your security. It's not where you place your hope. Here's how he says it. Riches don't last forever. Another verse he says they just kind of seem to fly away. And does a crown endure to all generations? So think about this. Kings and their wealth. And Solomon is in a great place to write this, right? Because is Saul and his dynasty, is his kids on the throne? It's not King Saul. The crown doesn't last forever. It doesn't always get passed down to kids. And certainly with Israel's history coming up, with the king after king and so many bad ones. No, they don't all last forever. And so whether it's your vocation, your career, or whether it's your paycheck, that is not a guarantee. Wealth is shaky. Careers are shaky. And God doesn't guarantee that you're going to have both of those for the rest of your life. And some of you have lived that, and some of you know that and feel that even now. If we know that, and if we know that some of this is even part of, right? And when you talk about a pandemic, and you think about the fall, you think about the fall of mankind, and that the ground is going to produce thorns and thistles, and working it is not as easy as it used to be. It's sweat of your brow, and even that's not a guarantee. Hard work's not a guarantee. I heard one pastor say once, I think it was Tim Keller, that said once, there's that proverb that says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it's death. He said, we always traditionally take that to mean it's like the broad way, not Jesus' way, but the broad way leads to destruction. But he says that there's also kind of a truth in there that not all of your efforts are going to pay off. And there may be a way that seems right that doesn't really go well in the end. And this is not a guarantee for us. And so if we come at this text like wealth is not the ultimate foundation, then I can put God as the source of my hope and my strength and His faithfulness. We're never going to sing about money being faithful to us because we know it's not. And we're not going to praise our careers as if that will be there for us forever because we know it's shaky. Consider this verse in Timothy, 1 Timothy 6:17. As for the rich in this present age, which is interesting, right? In this present age, which means there's no guarantee that if you're rich in this present age and you're a believer, it means you're going to be rich in the next age, right? There's treasures in heaven. We'll come back to that idea, right? But as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty. Don't be prideful. Don't be arrogant. Nor set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Don't put your hope on the wrong thing, or you will be disappointed at some point, severely disappointed. When you put your hope in money and it fails you, you're only a hop, skip, and a jump away from blaming God, right? But you're the one that put your hope in the wrong thing. God is consistent. He's faithful. He's a rock. He's unchanging. Every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. And so, here's the encouragement for us today. The warning of where not to put our hope. And I guess that brings up the question of, well, how much do I need to be secure, right? How much do I need? I love having this conversation with Christians, because it's a wrestling match a little bit of what percentage is it, or how many months of income do I need? I mean, some people are really thankful that they have some extra savings right now because of what's going on in our country and around the world. How much do you need? Well, I know that Jesus warns against building the bigger barns, right? There's a warning there that I'm accumulating. How much wealth do you need? And I guess if you're a guy like Rockefeller, I think his answer was just a little bit more. And when you get in that mindset of money as ultimate security, you will always need just a little bit more. But that's not how God has called you to live. He's called you to trust His provision. And that leads to the final point. And that's at the end. We ought to beware the building of bigger barns and storing up more and more. But before I get to that last point, another thing that struck me that I think we ought to be careful of, and I want to talk to the men especially right now, especially those whose financial situation or job situation is shaky. We all wear different hats. Husband, father, provider. And when that stuff gets shaken up, I know it shakes your identity. We all have little hats on that say what we do for a living, right? When men meet each other, it's, well, what do you do? We've all been asked that question. So there's something about this that goes to who we feel that we are. And it could be that we need a shift because we know the crown doesn't last forever. And the crown could be your job. And you wear that crown. This is my job. This is my identity. This is who I am. I remember a couple of years ago when I went to a great banquet, which I think I've talked about before. Wonderful experience. It's a men's retreat. There's a women's version of it as well, the Great Banquet. I went to one in Chicago. And I remember one of the first things you do when you go into the weekend is you don't really know anybody there. And they assign you to a table. And I remember going into it thinking, it'd be really great to go into this spiritual retreat and be anonymous, you know? I mean, I love being a pastor. I love the things that pastors do. They preach and they counsel and they care and they, all these different things. I love what pastors do. But I thought it'd be really great to come into this weekend and just not be Pastor Niall, but just be Niall, So I sat at the table and it came time for introductions. And I was like, oh boy, here we go. How do I say what I am without lying? Because I know you're sitting at a table with men and that's what they want to know. That's what they always want to know. And of course, that was the guy right next to me. What do you do? What do you do? And I thought about it. I work for a nonprofit. Was that a lie? I don't know. But that's what I said because I was trying to be incognito and I didn't want to be at this table learning and have like the pastor at the table and whatever that makes everybody else feel. I thought I could just be a little more secretive. Work at a nonprofit, and there it was. I hope I wasn't lying. I think my conscience was clear. And as the weekend went on, at some point, somebody came up to me that knew me that was part of the greater group, and all that, and, talked to me as if I was a pastor in a ministry. And at that point, again, it was just a little bit of a shift at the table of, well, what does the pastor think? And that's fine, totally fine. And I'm not complaining about that. But it reminded me that our identity is so wrapped up in that. And we got to be very, very careful. Because when the crown is removed, we're still a child of God. We're still beloved by Christ. And if the paycheck goes down, I remember I had a good friend in seminary, and he worked in Hollywood, and he filmed commercials, and then he went into ministry. And he said the first year he was in ministry, he went to his accountant and took all of his pay stubs and W-2s and all that, well, all the W-2s, right? And the accountant says, "That's great. Where's the rest?" There's a little bit of shift between the commercial filmer and the ministry guy, right? That's so great. But when that decreases, what does that do to your identity? Shouldn't be there. The crown doesn't last forever. God lasts forever. He's made you to last forever and to be in his kingdom forever. Don't put your hope in wealth. Finally, look at the end of this passage. When the grass is gone and the new growth appears and the vegetation of the mountains is gathered. There's some sort of harvest thing going on. Do you see that here? You're gathering in the harvest. You've worked hard, and now it's all paying off. Verse 26. The lambs will provide your clothing, and the goats the price of a field. There will be enough goat's milk for your food, for the food of your household, and the maintenance of your girls, which seem to be, I think he's talking about servants that are in your household working, that you're providing for. So at the end here, we see the purpose of wealth, right? What you're supposed to be doing with it. You're supposed to be providing for you and for your household and for those attached to your household. So number 3 is God provides for you so that you can be a channel of blessing for other people. God provided the goats. He provided the milk. He provided the herds. He provided the harvest. You worked, but he provided. And at the end of it all, your work and his provision, you have enough for you and your household and beyond. You can go the next step. That when wealth comes to you, you are to be the channel of blessing to others. When we were in Uganda, when Christy and I were there, the first couple weeks, I did our laundry by hand in a bathtub. You can ask Christy how they turned out. I thought they were perfectly wearable clothing, And I thought my swishing in the tub was just as good as the agitator in my washing machine. But apparently my agitating wasn't as good as it should have been, right? It was just okay. If you ask Christy, it was horrible, though. It was bad, right? Which is kind of funny. When I left, And we were kind of in a more rural area when we were in the process of adoption. But when I left, Christy went. I came back to the States, and Christy had to remain there to work on the passport stuff. And she was in the capital city. And she spoke with somebody, and they told her, when you're here, and if you can afford it, you should hire somebody to do your laundry. And you might think, well, I can cut corners, and I can fill up the tub, and I can do all this myself. I can do it. But this is what was said to us. If you can afford to support somebody else in that culture, you should pay them to do it. And I talked to some friends of mine from Kenya, and I asked them their experience with that. And they said, oh yes. If you have enough wealth, if you have enough money that you can afford to pay someone who has less to do your laundry, you should do that and support their livelihood. I guess it's their way of kind of doing what we do, right? Support the local businesses, right? You know, like we want to support these businesses in our own community. It's that sort of feel. You have an obligation to do it that way. And so that, it was a reminder to me that if I have more than what I need, I should be looking out for those who have less than what they need and helping where I can. And that was the reminder to me through that. Let's have a few scriptural reminders of this whole idea of whatever I have is to provide for the household. And it's to provide for beyond the household, perhaps even. Here's 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for the members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I mean, that's pretty serious, right? If you refuse to provide and you're not looking for work and you're not going down that road, that's worse than being an unbeliever. That's pretty heavy language here. Here's Ephesians 4:28. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Now, it's assumed that he's the thief, right? The thief is somebody who takes more for himself, right? He steals. He's about himself. He's selfish. He takes from others. But let him not steal anymore. Let that guy work. And when he works, he becomes now a person who's earning income to provide for himself, but also so that he might help other people in need. There's the purpose, right? God has given that money to help other people. Okay, so here's 1 Timothy 6:18 and 19. This is the last part of not hoping in riches that we read earlier. They, meaning the rich in this present age, are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. And I think I read this and I go, look. If you have more than what you need to live on, the reason God has given you that wealth is so that you can be generous with it. I can't see any other purpose for it that's like a biblical purpose, right? I mean, yes, we can enjoy, and yes, you're going to take a vacation, and yes, you're going to use some money to enjoy. I'm not saying that is wrong. But last week we looked at Agur, and Agur prayed that God, don't make me wealthy and don't make me poor. Keep me in the middle somewhere, right? But it's a good thing, too, remember, if you're a Christian who knows how to make money. Why? Because then you have the opportunity to be generous with it. To be generous with it. And that's how you fight the love of money. That's how you fight the hope that you put in money. So when you say, well, how much do I need? How much will provide for security in retirement? I'm not your financial advisor, but I do know this. If you view wealth as something that comes to you and stays with you, you become a cesspool. You don't become a channel of blessing. And that's what God would have you be. Be rich in good works. Be generous and ready to share. Ready to share with those who have needs. And that's why, if you want to know the reason, Why did God entrust wealth to you? Why did God give you more than what you need? There's the reason. It's a biblical reason. There's a story told of a guy who was wealthy, and he died, and he went to heaven, and he was talking to Peter and getting the whole tour of heaven thing. And as they were touring heaven, he saw his neighbor drive by in a Mercedes. And he was like, wow, you've got those here, you know? That's great. I can't wait to see what I'm going to drive, right? And Peter said, well, here's how we do it up in heaven. We give you a vehicle, we give you a mode of transportation based on how generous you were in your life. That's what we have to work with. That's how we do it. It's like, all right, great. So Peter says, over here, here's your vehicle. And it was a Honda motor scooter. The guy got a Honda motor scooter. Now, Christy would say that's a good vehicle. She's always wanted one of those, right? She would love that. And so Peter's like, this is what you got. And the guy's like, what? He's so disappointed. He's like, no. That can't be right. What is going on? And Peter says, I'm sorry. That's all we got to work with for you, you know? That's what you get. And so a week goes by, and the guy was seen later by Peter riding his motor scooter, and he had a great big smile on his face while he was riding his scooter. And Peter said, oh, I see you've acclimated to the scooter. I see you're enjoying it. And he's like, yep, everything changed when I saw my boss on a skateboard. That did it. The boss on a skateboard, right? By the way, that's not true or accurate or biblical. That's not how it works. But there is an ancient conviction that goes right along with that, and that's that you would lay up treasure in heaven. Lay up treasure in heaven. And when I think about, there's a passage that has always grabbed my attention when it comes to being generous and laying up treasures in heaven. And I think it only makes sense if you have this kind of mindset. And this is where we're going to end today, 2 Corinthians 8, 3-5. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then, by the will of God, to us. And I think about the begging, you know. Please, Paul, let us help you bring relief to the saints somewhere else that are struggling, don't have what they need. Maybe there's a famine, maybe there's something going on. Please, let us help you. We're begging you to let us help you. And if you don't have a concept of treasure in heaven, that just doesn't make sense. Please, take what we have to help someone else. And Paul says they gave according to their means, and I can testify even beyond their means. Have you ever given beyond your means? Like giving and you felt it? And you felt it? It's like the guy, I heard the story about the guy in the church, and he was like giving to the building project or whatever, and the guy was saying to his neighbor in church, he says, I can give $1,000 to this building project and not even feel it. And his neighbor said, well, then you ought to give $2,000 or $3,000 and feel it, you know? I mean, that's, you know, like, have you ever been down that road to give beyond your means? God, in blessing us with wealth, is driving us forward in generosity to lay up true treasure, to provide for our needs and beyond. May we consider and may we be faithful ourselves in how we give. I would invite you to stand now as we will be dismissed with the Lord's blessing. Father, I thank you for giving us clear direction in how we should view money, how we should manage it, and ultimately the truth that 100% of it is yours. May you help us steward it well. God, I pray now specifically for those whose finances and whose job has been impacted recently. God, I pray that you would give them great encouragement this day, knowing that they have you, the source of hope, the faithful God, and that they would find their identity there. And of course, Lord, I also pray for the practical part of this, of helping them find work, of supplying the need. And I pray that you would show yourself to be the good God who gives good gifts and leads us along. Father, thank you for your many blessings. Most of all, we thank you for the blessing of Jesus Christ, who died to give us and pour out the riches of grace abundantly down on us, to cover all of our sin, to give us a new identity, to give us a hope and a future, to inherit as sons of the living God. We thank you and praise you for your wisdom. Now may we go and live by it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The Lord bless you.